Everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. Looking forward to talking with Scott Weavil. Scott, it's great to connect with you. I'm looking forward to it. You're the managing director, Sierra Pacific Partners. You guys do M&A and investment banking. According to your website, you make deals happen. I like that. So, to me, M&A and investment banking, I'm 52 years old. When my buddies were going to college, not many people were, quote unquote, saying like, I'm going into investment banking, I'm going into mergers and acquisitions. Today in business schools across the country, it seems to be the number one seat that people are just, doing everything they possibly can to get into this space. Private equity, investment banking, mergers and acquisitions. So I want to start at kindergarten level, and then we'll kind of work our way up. In layman terms, and I appreciate you being on the show, define mergers and acquisitions and define investment banking.
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much for having me, John. And I think that's the right place to start. Mergers and acquisitions, or M&A. What we're basically talking about is buying and selling businesses, right? A merger is a legal structure where basically two entities come together and one survives. Most of what we do, particularly at the not, $1 billion plus level, is not going to be an actual merger, as you see, for the most part. Yeah. We're usually talking about stock purchases and asset purchases, but really that's what we're talking about, is buying and selling businesses. Yeah. And as a whole, investment banking has other aspects, including capital markets, so debt and equity placements, just general financial analysis and other things of that nature. But we at Sierra Pacific Partners are pretty much exclusively focused on sell-side M&A, meaning that we represent the sellers of companies. They're for sure our buy-side advisors. So if you're, going out looking to execute a roll-up and things like that, you can absolutely hire firms to help you find those targets and evaluate them. But we're focused mainly on the sell side.
Yeah, I was in commercial real estate for a long time, and what they say in commercial real estate is list to last. You want to work with the sellers. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, particularly lower in the market, you just don't find too many buyers that are willing to pay for services is the issue.
Right. No, 100%. So a couple of things. I want to back up a little bit, and I want to talk about skill set, influence, negotiation, et cetera, because I think in your space, those skill sets, amongst many others, are really, really important. But just kind of honing into those two, any that you want to add. How does somebody who wants to enter the space, we'll get into kind of more of the continuum in a minute, but entering the space, influence, negotiation, what other skill sets should they be honing and working on to get into this space?
For sure. Like, you definitely need some fundamental finance skills, right? That's very, very clear. However, I will say, at the public company level, it's very, very finance driven. Not to say that soft skills don't matter, but I think as you move down market into the middle market, whatever, less than 500 million in purchase price, certainly less than 100 million, the soft skills really, really matter, because on the one hand, you need to be passionate about your deal and advocate for your client, but you can't be maybe quite as zealous as what you think about when you think about a lawyer, right? It's got to be a win-win situation. There are bumps in every transaction, and it's sort of your job to try to smooth those over if it can be done. Now, for sure, there's deals where, for whatever reason, the buyer on my side just is not a good fit. My seller doesn't like the buyer, and it can't be smoothed over. But you need to let the seller, you have to be able to coach your clients that what is normal, and you have to be able to help get your clients see things from the other side's perspective sometimes, because one-sided deals don't get done, basically.
Right. How do you do that? Because I think that's a lot of art, a little bit of science, but a lot of art. How do you do that in the art of negotiation, get people to raise their awareness? I see this in my business all the time, right? The first step is giving people enough data and a little bit of the art to raise their awareness so they can see things from a new perspective. And sometimes when you're talking about the types of deals we're talking about right now, sometimes the sellers can lose sight of that, 400 million versus 410 million, it's like, so how do you do that?
For sure. I mean, as you said, I think the data informs the art. Sometimes I choose not to be the bearer of bad news, and I let the data present the bad news for me.
Totally.
Never in a vacuum, but there's all kinds of information out there on M&A terms and what's common and what's not, and what works in some circumstances and what don't. So that's one of the first things. Like, I was talking to a client yesterday who's potentially going to get a disproportionate amount of his purchase price in an earnout. Sorry for delving into jargon. Let's just say that's not money that's paid at the time of closing.
Yeah.
And so I gave him stats. I said, hey, last year, 34% of deals had earnouts. And on average, the earnout was whatever. I think it was 32% of the closing purchase price, right? So that allows him to go back and really argue for an earnout that's below 50% of the total value. So that's an example of using data. But I think that's advocating, I think, more to socialize clients as to what's normal. Is just a general, you take the data on different points and you explain it to them, but you also say, hey, we cannot win on every single point. We need to come up with some must-haves and then some nice-to-haves and then some things we can give away. And it's ideal when we can give away, when our nice-to-haves are must-haves for the other side. That way we can give them something of value without giving up something of value. And absolutely, like you said, the purchase price, huge mistake that we see is, taking a larger top line purchase price, which for various reasons has much lower probability of actually making it into your wallet than taking a lower price that's going to make it to your wallet.
Greed kills. Yeah. Making smart business decisions, which is why I think people need outside guidance like yourselves to, bring them the reality that many people may not and usually don't. Let's talk about a couple things. Most people, let's assume for the sake of the discussion, someone is passionate about a business that they start. When should they be thinking about, getting the company ready for sale? Should they think about it? If they're in their passion, will it ultimately happen? Or if whether you're going to sell it or not, what fundamentals do you need to really kind of have as a consistent through line of the business? So no matter if you decide to sell or not, your business is sound, can scale and grow.
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. So the short answer is the best folks, the best founders at this game, before they even launch the business, they've built a business that's designed to sell, right? Now, I understand that's not where everyone's coming from. I mean, you mentioned passion, right? So that may not be where a particular seller is coming from. But the short answer is the longer the runway you have, the better. The things that we really see that are important for selling are lessened owner dependency. So we definitely talk to sellers that are very proud of how hard they work and that they wear every hat in the business. To a buyer, that sounds like a nightmare, right? So that's something we really coach on. Having very sound historical financials is something that we talk about a lot. The business wants to see regular growth. You don't want to be in decline. Those are things that I think are some of the lower hanging fruit. And I would say, generally speaking, businesses are valued based on a multiple of earnings, right? So there's two ways you can sort of influence that. The earnings themselves. So as you hit thresholds, a $1 million EBITDA business is going to have a lower multiple than a $10 million business. That jump is harder. But within the thresholds, you typically see a range. Like, let's say it's 5.2 to 7.2x, right? By influencing some of these qualitative factors, you can get to a higher into that range. And like, let's say you're doing 4 million in earnings, right? That's like an $8 million difference, whether you're at 5.2 or 7.2. And I think these things are all great to sell, but the sort of obvious secret here is, even if you don't want to sell, these things make it all much more pleasant to own your business, right? Not to be wearing every hat, putting out fires all day, to have financials that you can actually look at and use to guide you to make decisions. So even if you decide not to sell, that's great stuff to have.
Yeah, it's great. That's great fundamentals. Let's talk about going back to the same assumption that you're passionate and you love your business. I'm 52. When I was 23, I started an internet company with my brother and a buddy, and we sold it to, at the time, was the largest internet professional service firm in the world 2 years later. And one thing that I learned through that process is forecasting, kind of knowing where the industry was going, because we were very pioneerish in it, knowing and when to leave, and not falling in love with the product and not being too emotionally connected, because I think that can make you make bad decisions. So can you kind of talk on that, how to be passionate, but not necessarily fall in love with the company, not to get too emotionally attached to it, but still having a passion in your heart in the business. And when, if you decide to sell, when it's time to leave, and kind of move to the next level of your business that maybe you can't get yourself to.
Yeah, for sure. So I think generally speaking, as you move up market, what you see is a separation of ownership and management, right? Not universal, right? We've got Facebook and we've got OpenAI with their founders still involved in management. But generally speaking, larger businesses, taking Amazon, that they have a diverse base of shareholders that are not working in the office every day, right? And that creates a level of separation and professionalism that I think is helpful. Now, I'm not saying, your typical lower middle market business is going to have that level of separation, but I do think being able to put yourself in a role as an owner where you work more on the business than in the business on a day-to-day basis helps with that separation, because you're not on the front lines of providing that product or service to customers, right? And so I do think that that's important. And I think, as you mentioned, it's interesting to analyze skill set, right? I mean, I think we all know that some founders that are great at, bringing it to, for instance, a technology product to market, developing that technology product may not be the same CEO that can oversee 500 employees, right? And so I think being able to look inside and sort of know whether or not you can take it to the next level is a great ability to have. And I think a lot of that, it's not rocket science. If you get to a position where you are successful and you find yourself in a role that you just do not like, that's a pretty good sign that that you're not where you need to be. And I will add that there's other things you can do. We definitely see founders who want to stay in a more technical role, perhaps, or whatever it is that they're doing, but they need a CEO, so they just hire one. And even though in the corporate hierarchy, they're actually under the CEO, they're still the owner. So that's another way you can deal with that if you're not ready to sell.
Yeah. Thank you for that. When you go into a company and a company comes to you and says, hey, we're ready to sell, and you do your due diligence, what are one or two things that you see that are the biggest mistakes that they have made, the biggest gaps that they've overlooked?
I think, like I said, we see issues with financials. Depending on industry at a certain size, you need to be moving towards accrual accounting and GAAP. And that's going to be a big deal as you go up in size, because otherwise it's going to create issues. I think that's the biggest one. And then just not being organized and able to have information that's going to be responsive to a diligence process. Because I know if I can't get the information that I need to sort of analyze the company, review it, value it, and bring it to market, you're definitely not going to survive, particularly a sophisticated buyer's diligence process. Yeah. So those just fundamental levels of organization are what we see. Other very common deal killers are certainly customer concentration. Mm-hmm. That can definitely, if most of your earnings are driven by a few customers, that can definitely scare buyers off.
Yeah. So Scott, I'm a business coach. This is my company, the Jon Dwoskin Experience. And as I said, I work with solopreneurs to Fortune companies. I'm a high ticket executive coach. But on the flip side, I have another company called Launch 3, which are all these on-demand courses on how to grow your business, your life, your brand. And it's a $10 a month product. And a business partner and we give a ton of value to these people. And many of the people who are in the college age group who belong to Launch 3, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them want to get into investment banking. And they're in business schools, they're grinding it out, they're joining clubs, they're attending workshops, they're doing everything they possibly can to get in the door. Getting in the door is really, really difficult for many of them. There's not a lot of seats for a lot of people who are in line. And so what I'm curious, for the kids who are graduating business schools today, what are you looking for? Like, what makes the ideal candidate for you and all of these other investment banking shops?
For sure. I mean, it's incredibly difficult. I think I read on LinkedIn yesterday that Goldman Sachs had like 350,000 applicants to be interns for the summer or something.
They
like
offered
that.
how many? 100? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a relatively large number, but definitely not 100th of the 300,000.
Right. So what differentiates you? I actually have an add-on to this question, right? Because I think I want to know what differentiates two different people. One, straight A's, top class, shoo-in. B, not a shoo-in, really smart, maybe didn't get the grades, but has the boldness, right? And has the moxie. Who, do you hire someone who shows up with, pizza for 100 people in your lobby, who have less grades, but they just have like boldness, or top of the class who's boring?
And so I'm going to say this depends on the firm, right? So unfortunately, if we're at the bulge bracket firms, they're probably going to only choose people that have both those things together. That's just the way of the world these days. But I think particularly
the bright,
they're going to have the whole, and they're probably Olympic gold medalists as well.
Yeah.
But I think as you move more away from the bulge brackets and into the middle market, I do think the personality matters a lot in getting those deals done. And I would definitely say we're known as being sort of same as attorneys, as being a dry profession. So I think the more you can show that you've got some personality and charisma, you're going to stand out, right? Yeah. And I think passion is also super important. So showing, I know everybody has all the club involvements and things like that, but if you can tell a coherent story about why you're excited about the space, I think that's super impressive. That's more impressive to me than, I learned Python over the summer to help with my investment banking skills. That's also impressive, by the way. But
but you want to, what you're talking about is the person sitting across from me, are they bright? Are they bold? But can they tell a story?
Right. And can I trust them to have the right soft skills? Right. When we get to an issue, are they going to be able to advocate for our client, but also smooth the bumpy road? Right. Is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. That goes back to kind of what we initially were talking about. When I was in commercial real estate, I sold apartment buildings. That was 90% of what I did. And I always used, and if a deal didn't die, like you talked about earlier, then there was something wrong. Any smooth deal made me nervous. But I always used to call it, especially when I was a broker for 6 years, and then I grew and ran my office for 6 years. I always refer to it as like, you just got to go in, you're just playing ping pong, back and forth. And, you're the ultimate facilitator, right? You are, that's our job. And so kind of the same in your world as you're talking about. And so the importance of listening, active listening, responding, not reacting, keeping your cool, and keeping the conversation going. Just talk on that for a minute.
Yeah, that's super important. And, I got off a call with the seller the other day. Our buyer had agreed to raise their price considerably. And the seller's reaction was, that's great. Let's push for more. They clearly want this. And, I said, hey, you weren't on the call. I didn't necessarily tell you their full reaction to us demanding a higher price. It wasn't, high fives via Zoom or whatever, and I told her, I was like, part of my role is I don't necessarily tell you everything that the other side says and exactly how they say it, and vice versa. Right. I want you guys to be candid with me. But if we have full transparency on that, then it's likely to damage the relationship between the buyer and the seller. Right. And so that's a clear line. And to be 100% clear, I'm not suggesting hiding facts or being dishonest about folks' position, but it's just every emotional reaction doesn't necessarily need to be shared, particularly if we're going to get something across the line. And that's exactly right. It is facilitation. Yeah.
I used to, I remember, sellers saying, you tell the buyer, I couldn't even repeat it. And then, you go and you say, hey, to the buyer, the seller really wants to move things forward, right? You have to put it in a language that can be heard. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So let's talk about your shop. Tell me a little bit about what your shop does and focuses on.
Yeah, so like I said, we focus on sell side M&A. We're pretty much in the $5 to $100 million price range, with probably most of the businesses we sell between 10 and 50 million, something like that. So in revenue terms, that's probably 5 to 150 in revenue. In EBITDA, maybe 2 to 25 million, something like that. We're industry agnostic, work across the United States. I've got the SEC license, so we can do pretty much any transaction anywhere without having to worry about that. And I think a couple things that make us different, I've been doing this a really long time. I got started as a public company M&A lawyer back mid 2000s, something like that. We're success fee only, so which is rare in the middle market. Typically, you pay retainers, milestone fee, stuff like that. We do try to just take on a very few, 4 to 5 deals a year. That way we absolutely, I know the company's in and out. I'm not a business broker looking who owns that one again, that type of thing with 30 listings in play. And I do think it's helpful that we work across varied industries. It lets us cross apply concepts and things like that. And just frankly, I find it more fun to work, to have something in construction going, something in SaaS going, something in health tech going all at the same time.
Yeah. I agree. I work with all different companies, all different product types. I mean, that are sold within those companies, because otherwise, it all bleeds into and helps in every other place. I love it. All right, quick speed round. A book that's had the biggest impact on you.
Oh man, this is a surprise. I think Buy Then Build by Walker Diebel's great book. It talks about entrepreneurship through acquisition. You're probably aware of it, but I think that's been great to open up people's eyes as to opportunities here.
I've had him on my podcast. Yeah, he's
excellent.
Yeah, best piece of wisdom you've ever received.
Everything works a little bit. I think it's a marketing adage, but I think it's true.
Last question. Finish this sentence. One soft skill that everybody needs to have in any type of business, specifically M&A and investment banking, is?
I think it's perspective. Again, being able to put yourself in the other party's shoes and then see details in the context of the whole.
I love it. Scott, this was great. I love this conversation. I love this podcast because I get to have people on who are in alignment with my mission to help people get unstuck and grow their business, their mindset. And I always like to extract one thing, something you just said, evolve their perspective. And when you evolve your perspective, whether you're a seller, a buyer, anybody on the team, everything rises and everything can be seen clearer and articulated in a bit more simple way. And everybody just kind of gets it. And it allows everybody to stay in flow, which is the key. Think Community, you can reach Scott at SierraPacificPartners.com, and you can reach me if you want to talk about any business coaching at JonDwoskin.com. Scott, this was great. I really appreciate your time. This was awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.